All right, welcome to the Explainer. Today we're diving into this amazing legal puzzle from the ancient world. You could almost call it a whodunit, or maybe more like a who gets it. I know, it sounds super specific, right? In an ancient temple, when an animal is sacrificed, who gets to keep the leather? But believe it or not, the answer to this one little question, it unlocks this incredible masterclass in logical reasoning and textual investigation that people have been studying for centuries. Our whole case really revolves around this. Okay, so our investigation kicks off right here, with a rule from the Torah. And on the surface, it seems totally straightforward. The priest who handles the sacrifice gets to keep the animal's hide. Kind of like a perk of the job. But, of course, there's always a catch, isn't there? The deal is, the offering has to be valid. It has to actually count for the person who brought it. Simple enough. But this is where things get interesting, because the ancient scholars looked at this and immediately saw a way to expand this whole idea. And here's how they did it. They used this really powerful logical tool. It's called an a fortiori inference. It basically means all the more so. And the logic is just, it's beautiful. Think about it. For a regular burnt offering, the meat gets completely burned up, so the priest only gets the hide. But for other really sacred offerings, they get the hide and a piece of the meat. So the thinking was, if the priests get the hide when they get zero meat, then they should definitely get the hide when they're already getting the meat, right? Makes perfect sense. So you hear that argument and you think, okay, case closed. The priests get the hides from pretty much all the important offerings. But not so fast. This is where the real detective work kicks into high gear. The whole investigation circles back to just two little words in that original verse we looked at. Yeah, the text specifically says a man's burnt offering. Now, for these legal scholars, every single word in the Torah is there for a reason. Nothing is extra. So they ask the million-dollar question. If the rule applies to a man's offering, what kind of offering is this phrase trying to exclude? What's an offering that isn't considered a man's? And that one question, it kicked off a huge debate. Two leading detectives, you could say, stepped up with their theories. You've got Rabbi Yehuda on one side, saying it excludes offerings bought with property that was already given to the temple. And then on the other side, Rabbi Yosei comes in with a totally different idea. It excludes certain offerings from converts. Two completely different paths to solve the same puzzle. Now, the Gemara, which is basically the record of these super detailed discussions, it doesn't just take someone's word for it. A theory gets put on the stand, It gets cross-examined. And that's exactly what happens to Rabbi Yehuda's idea. And bam, the challenge comes right away. Another scholar, Rabbi Nehemiah, steps up and points to a well-known precedent, a ruling from a famous high priest named Jehoiada. He's basically saying, hey, Rabbi Yehuda, your theory sounds good, but it completely contradicts this established ruling we all know about. And this is like the big, dramatic moment in the courtroom scene. The text just says, Rabbi Yehuda was silent. And in the world of Talmudic debate, silence is everything. It means you can see the point. He didn't ever come back. His theory had a major hole in it, and now the investigation had to pivot. So let's break down what this precedent was that stumped him. Jehoiada had ruled that when offerings were purchased with leftover consecrated funds, like, say, money left over from buying another sacrifice, the priests still got to keep the hide. And that just flies right in the face of Rabbi Yehuda's broad idea that any offering from consecrated funds was out. So what does this twist mean? It doesn't mean Rabbi Yehuda's theory was totally wrong, just that it was way too broad. So the investigators had to go back to the drawing board. They had to find a different, much more specific example of consecrated property where the priest wouldn't get the hide, a case that Jehoiada's ruling didn't touch. And they found one. It's this super specific, probably pretty rare situation. The case of someone who consecrates their entire estate to the temple. I mean everything. Land, money, and any animals they have that could be used for an offering. So, according to another scholar's ruling, this very unique case gets a very unique treatment. The animals? Yep, they're sacrificed on the altar. But their hides? That's different. They're considered part of the general donation. They go to the temple treasury for upkeep, not into the priest's pocket as a personal perk. And there we have it. The first part of the mystery is solved. That phrase, a man's offering, excludes something incredibly specific. It's not just any consecrated property. It's an offering that came from someone who gave everything they owned to the temple. Why? Because in that case, the hide's ownership was basically transferred to the temple from the get-go. Okay, but hold on. That was just Rabbi Yehuda's theory, all patched up. What about our second detective, Rabbi Yosei? Remember his idea about an offering from a convert? Why would that be excluded?
Well, it turns out his theory was also about a very, very specific legal loophole. We're not talking about just any convert. This is about a convert who brings an offering and then tragically dies without any legal heirs. See, in Jewish law, a convert without any Jewish-born children is considered to have no natural heirs.
So in that very precise scenario, the offering is now legally ownerless. It doesn't belong to anyone. And if it's ownerless, well, it can't be called a man's offering, can it? The base rule from Leviticus just doesn't apply. And if the rule doesn't apply, the priest has no claim to the hide. Simple as that. All right, let's just zoom out for a second. We started with a simple question about a piece of leather, and we've just walked through some seriously complex logic, legal precedents, and these incredibly niche scenarios. So what's the big takeaway here? I think the crucial point is this. In this entire system of thought, every single word matters. This whole incredible investigation, with all its twists and turns, it all came down to figuring out what two tiny words, a man's, were meant to exclude. It's a perfect example of how a huge, nuanced legal system gets built by carefully analyzing every last syllable of a foundational text. And this whole process isn't just some ancient curiosity. It's really fundamental to how law and philosophy, and even how we interpret constitutions works to this very day. So it leaves us with this one last thought to chew on. How much meaning, how much world building can be unpacked from just a single, carefully chosen phrase?